March 1945, Western Germany. 17 American military vehicles rolled to a stop on a narrow country road. Not because of enemy fire, not because of an ambush. Every one of them had broken down. Nearly 80 American soldiers suddenly found themselves stranded beside a small German farmhouse with only a few days of field rations, freezing nights ahead and no idea when help would arrive. The old farmer who owned the land had every reason to hate them. The war had taken almost everything from him. Yet what happened over the next 3 days would eventually land on General George Patton's desk and force one of America's toughest commanders to make a decision that almost nobody ever talks about. But before we continue, if you enjoy forgotten stories from World War II, make sure to subscribe. There are countless remarkable moments that history books rarely mention. The convoy had left before sunrise, expecting to reach its destination by late afternoon. Instead, mechanical failures began one after another. A damaged transmission, 2 broken axles, several engines that simply refused to start. Within hours, 17 vehicles were scattered along the road outside the farming community near Kaiserslautern. Army mechanics examined each truck carefully. Their conclusion wasn't encouraging. Repairs would take several days. No replacement convoy could reach them quickly. The men would have to stay exactly where they were. The soldiers organized makeshift sleeping areas beside their vehicles. Canvas tarps became temporary shelters. Blankets were stretched across truck frames to block the cold wind. Their remaining food consisted mainly of field rations that were never intended to last very long. Across the dirt road stood a quiet stone farmhouse. Its owner watched silently from the doorway. His name was Georg Haller. He was 64 years old. He had farmed the same land for more than 3 decades, long before American soldiers had ever set foot in Germany, long before another world war had changed everything. He said nothing as the convoy settled into his yard. He simply watched, then turned around and disappeared back inside the house. Georg Haller had been working that farm for 31 years. He inherited it from his father in 1914, just months before the First World War began. He survived one war, then another. The land had never made him wealthy, but it had always given his family enough to live. Until the war took that away, too. His oldest son was killed on the Eastern Front in the autumn of 1942. The telegram arrived weeks later. His younger son died during the Battle of Stalingrad in January 1943. Another letter. Another funeral that never happened. His wife tried to stay strong. She worked beside him through another difficult winter. But by early 1944, illness claimed her life. Now the farmhouse felt empty. Only 2 men remained with him, Karl and Oscar. Both were in their 50s. Both had worked for Haller's father before working for him. Neither had received wages for almost 4 months. There was simply no money left. Yet neither man abandoned the farm. There was nowhere else to go. Germany's railways barely functioned. Factories stood silent. Entire towns had become ruins. The farm was the only home they had left. That first evening, none of them spoke to the American soldiers. They watched from inside the farmhouse. Windows as the convoy struggled to organize itself. Mechanics crawled beneath broken trucks. Soldiers built small fires. Others quietly counted what little food remained. Nobody crossed the road. Nobody asked for help. The next morning before sunrise, Karl quietly looked toward the stranded convoy. "They'll run out of food soon," he said. Oscar nodded. "They've been sleeping in the cold." Neither man mentioned uniforms. Neither mentioned nationality. They simply saw hungry men. Karl walked into the storage shed. He loaded baskets with fresh bread baked only 2 days earlier. Oscar filled sacks with potatoes. Haller opened the cellar and brought out preserved vegetables that had been saved for the coming spring. For several minutes, nobody spoke. Then Haller finally broke the silence. "Take it to them." The 2 farmhands crossed the yard carrying enough food for nearly 80 soldiers. American sentries immediately raised their rifles. The farmhands stopped. One slowly pointed at the baskets. The soldiers cautiously approached. Inside were fresh loaves of bread, potatoes, pickled vegetables, and enough food to feed the entire convoy. The Americans looked at each other in disbelief. No one had asked for anything. An interpreter thanked the 2 men. Karl simply shrugged. "We thought you might need it." Less than an hour later, a second surprise arrived. Large metal coffee containers, freshly brewed over Haller's kitchen stove. Hot coffee was poured into American mess cups one after another. For many of those soldiers, it was the first real meal they had eaten in days. The same thing happened again the following morning. And again the morning after that. 3 consecutive days. Every meal arrived before anyone had to ask. Not once did Haller request payment. Not once did he mention his sons. Not once did he complain about the war. He simply fed the men, then returned quietly to his work. By the 4th morning, Army mechanics finally repaired the last damaged truck. The convoy prepared to leave. Before climbing into their vehicles, Staff Sergeant William Peavy walked to the farmhouse. Haller answered the door. The sergeant removed his helmet. "Thank you," he said simply. Haller nodded once, then replied with only one sentence. "Please close the gate when you leave." Nothing more. No speeches. No handshakes. Just those 6 quiet words. The convoy drove away, leaving the farm exactly as they had found it. But Sergeant Peavy couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. That evening, as he completed his official after-action report, he added one final paragraph. A paragraph that almost wasn't written. Within a week, that single report would reach the desk of General George S. Patton. Several days later, Staff Sergeant William Peavy's report arrived at 3rd Army headquarters. Most convoy reports were routine: vehicle numbers, fuel consumption, mechanical failures, nothing more. But one short paragraph caught General George Patton's attention. He read it once, then turned back, and read it again. The report described how an elderly German farmer had quietly fed 80 stranded American soldiers for 3 straight days without being asked. No request for payment, no expectation of reward, just food, coffee, and simple human kindness. Patton leaned back in his chair, then pressed the buzzer on his desk. "Send Major Dennis Howell in." A few moments later, the 3rd Army's quartermaster officer entered the room. "You wanted to see me, sir?" Patton handed him the report. "I have one question. How much would 3 days of food for 80 men cost if it came from a working farm?" Howell answered carefully. "I can give you a military estimate, sir." Patton shook his head. "No, I don't want a military estimate. I want the actual market value." Howell looked surprised. Patton continued, "I want to know what that food cost the farmer. Not what it would have cost the Army. There's a difference. Find the real figure." 2 hours later, Howell returned carrying several sheets of calculations. He had contacted Allied supply officers. He had checked local commodity prices: bread, potatoes, preserved vegetables, coffee. Everything had been calculated using current market values in the Kaiserslautern area. Patton reviewed every page, then signed the authorization immediately. But he wasn't finished. "The money will not be mailed. It will not be handed to a mayor. It will not pass through local officials. I want an officer to deliver it personally." Someone asked why. Patton answered quietly, "Because respect should be delivered face to face." A young lieutenant named Carl Reeves received the assignment. Before the war, he had worked in the import business and spoke fluent German. 3 days later, his jeep stopped outside Georg Haller's farmhouse. The old farmer opened the door. For several seconds, neither man spoke. Finally, Reeves introduced himself in German. He explained that General George Patton had personally ordered payment for the food provided to the stranded convoy. He explained that the amount had been calculated using current local market prices, not Army accounting figures, real prices. Haller listened without interrupting. When Reeves finished, the old farmer remained silent. Finally, he spoke. "I never expected payment. I didn't feed them for money. They were hungry. They needed food. That was enough." Reeves nodded. "I understand." But General Patton believed kindness should never become a financial loss. "The general ordered me to make sure you received this." For a long moment, Haller simply looked at the envelope. Then, he accepted it. Without opening it, he looked back at Reeves. "Would you like some coffee?" The lieutenant smiled. "I'd be honored." For the next 20 minutes, the American officer and the German farmer sat together at a small wooden kitchen table. They talked about farming, about the coming spring, about repairing old machinery, about weather. Neither man spoke about politics. Neither argued about the war. They simply shared coffee. When Reeves finally stood to leave, Georg Haller walked him to the front door. Then, for the first time, he extended his hand. The lieutenant shook it. Later, Reeves told his commanding officer, "That handshake meant more than the payment." Patton never mentioned the incident publicly. There were no speeches. No newspaper headlines. No medals. Just one quiet order: to make sure an honest man was treated honestly. Years later, people in the village remembered the American convoy. They remembered the old farmer who fed strangers without being asked. They remembered that the soldiers left the gate exactly as he had requested. Closed. Sometimes, the stories that never make the history books tell us the most about the people who lived through the war. What do you think? Was General Patton right to insist on paying the farmer the full value of what he had given? Or would a simple thank you have been enough? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoy Untold World War II stories like this one, Don't forget to subscribe for more.